Hi everyone and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy and I am joined for a reaction podcast, and I'm going to do several of these over the next couple of days with individuals who have been involved in many different ways in the UFO topic over the last couple of years. Who better to start off with than the co-founder of The Debrief, I believe one of the premier organisations for reporting on many topics, but particularly UFOs over the last few years. Joining me again is Tim McMillan. Welcome back, Tim.
Hey, Andy, it's good to be here, man. Good to see you.
Good to
Exciting
have you
times.
on. It is. I was going to say, like, hell of a few days for everyone involved in the UFO topic. How's it been for you and obviously the other folks over at the Debrief?
Oh man, it's been a busy week. Obviously, we kind of knew that going into it. Jumping right back into the fire because I came back from vacation in London actually Sunday night. So getting ready for a busy week, and it interestingly we kind of anticipated it. Obviously, there was going to be a lot of attention for the hearing, highly anticipated hearing, and then we also had kind of an unexpected surprise at the end of the week from Dr. Kirkpatrick, the director of AARO, the Pentagon's UFO study program. But we were also kind of planning because we have gotten word that though it didn't come out, the next AARO UAP report and NASA's UAP study is on time, and so those could have come out. We were kind of prepared; those could have come out this week too.
So thinking of, let's go back to the beginning then. Your thoughts going into the hearings, given the build-up. Obviously, Representative Tim Burchett's all over the news. He is, burning the candle at both ends. He is very much spearheading the efforts. What were your thoughts going into the hearings with Tim leading the charge, the changes, and what were you expecting before they kicked off?
I don't know what I was expecting. I would say my expectations were relatively low. They have been for all of these hearings. I didn't expect them to roll out the Roswell bodies, but at the same time, we knew going into this that we had David Grusch was going to be one of the people testifying, and having covered his story through Ralph and Leslie at the debrief, and then having an opportunity to talk to him considerably leading up to this, he's got some really compelling things to share. And so I didn't know how much of that was going to come out in the hearing. They tend to be political theater too. And we did see a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But my expectations were relatively low going into it. And so it was nice in this particular instance. I will admit I was surprised when it came down to it.
What were your thoughts when you heard about, well, I'm going to say last minute changes? Everyone was expecting Tim Burchett to be chairing the hearing with Representative Anna Paulina Luna, and then it seemed to change very last minute. But then I've heard rumblings that he was never meant to chair the hearing. That was a misunderstanding. Other folks saying that he was replaced. What are your understandings of that situation?
Yeah, I was really confused when I saw some of the drama coming out that Tim Burchett was saying he wasn't going to chair the hearing because I fell in the camp of people who never expected him to chair the hearing. And some of that, again, maybe it's because I've been doing a lot of traveling lately. I've been on vacation and traveling for work. And so I hadn't been as intimately paying attention to every bit of Tim Burchett's interviews or any of that kind of stuff. But just going into it, I knew that he was not a chair or a vice chair of that particular subcommittee or the oversight committee. And so, it's pretty black and white and standard in terms of every subcommittee sets their own rules. Almost all of them, it's that the chair of the committee, regardless of the hearing, always chairs it, is the person who's there. And after I saw a little bit of controversy with it, I actually pulled up that particular, the National Security Oversight Subcommittee's rules. And I'm like, it's black and white. So long as the chair of that subcommittee and vice chair are present, and there is no rule in their written record that allows them to even give that away. And so I don't know enough on the build up to there to know if there was any controversy, whether it was something that just was never covered. They kind of assumed everybody would know that, or perhaps they did indeed want to allow Burchett and Luna to chair it. But then at the last minute, somebody went, oh man, hey, the rules, there is no rule that allows us to give it away. There was certainly I will say, watching the hearing, there's certainly some neither of them were diminished in any capacity. In fact,
No,
both were allowed to read opening statements, which, that's up to the chair, but that's not normally, there's a lot of things that they were allowed to do. And in fact, Burchett, to a large degree, acted almost in the capacity of chair, frankly.
100%. Yeah.
So I don't think I think it was either somebody slipped up and didn't look at the brass tacks rules until the last minute. I think that's probably the most likely explanation there. It certainly didn't take away anything, I think.
No, not at all. And like you say, I think Tim Burchett, outside of the witnesses, certainly spoke more than anyone else, and everyone else was giving up their time. They get allotted 10 minutes to ask questions, don't they? And once they were finished, they were giving that time back to Tim Burchett. So that was pretty good that he got the time he was expecting anyway, because he did put, regardless what you think of Tim Burchett and his politics and all that stuff, he did put a lot of work into these going into it. So
Sure.
what was your actual reaction in the hearings? Go 2 hours, 20 minutes. What was immediately kind of jumping out at you?
Oh man, a lot of things. So we were watching the hearing through our debrief kind of workflow private chat, and I could describe that my reaction for a large part of it. The surprise blinking guy meme that's constantly like, what? That was a lot of my reaction. Just from the onset. So I had read David Grusch's opening statement the night before because they're required to provide those to the committee. And I noticed he had said under oath a couple of times. And I'm like, well, is he just assuming he's going to be under oath, or has he been told he's under oath? Because that's not, typically they don't swear in witnesses, especially for this type of committee hearing. This isn't. And so from the onset, I was really surprised that they swore them in under oath. And again, this is very atypical. It's not what you see. And so if anybody's ever seen any other hearings that you see the Secretary of Defense or the DNI testifying to Congress, they're not sworn in beforehand. So it's totally up to the discretion of the committee chair. But the fact they swore him in, I was like, wow, okay, so this is going to put whatever's said in this hearing is going to be legally binding. This is the same way if you're testifying in court. There are consequences if someone's willfully and knowingly lying. And so that really surprised me from the onset. And then obviously the subject matter surprised me, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that, and I'm sure some of the other guests you'll have on in this will get into some of that. But I'll say some of the other things that maybe kind of got looked over that surprised me. I was really surprised, and I would say impressed, that you had a number of non-committee members in attendance there. I mean, there was some grumblings about, well, the whole subcommittee wasn't there. Very typical. You only need 2 committee members to form a quorum, and in fact, a lot of times that's all you have. And we saw that with Dr. Kirkpatrick's hearing about 3 months ago. There's only three congressmen there. Yeah. But this one, you had 18 or 19, and a large number of those. So they formed the entire subcommittee, but a large number of those were non-committee members who were allowed to attend. So that was really surprising. So that was impressive because you saw a number of lawmakers who chose to attend, wanted to attend, were allowed opportunities to offer questioning. And out of those non-subcommittee members who attended, you had some really some political firebrands and some very well-known. AOC was there.
Yeah.
Matt Gaetz. Again, some of these are very controversial figures, and that's why I call them firebrands. But they generate a lot of attention, and so the fact that they were in attendance really, I found surprising, and I think the quality and tone of their questioning, I was very impressed with. This was not, again, these are politicians that are frequently seen on the news, frequently stirring up controversies for their different political factions. And there was none of that in this hearing. And that was really impressive. And I think you mentioned that just a moment ago when you talk about Tim Burchett and his politics. There are some controversial politicians that were in attendance there, but there was no controversy in this hearing. There was no political infighting. There was no kind of back and forth trying to get political points for any one side, but rather these were, for the most part, everyone was extremely engaged. And so that was really, I was impressed to see that. And I think that kind of, mentally noting it goes through it. And I think that every real significant politician in the U.S. government at this point, at the legislative level, so outside of the president, vice president, has really weighed in on this topic and actually weighed in, uh, taking a very serious, significant tone toward it. So I think that's impressive. That's interesting, and it leads you into this more realm of information that's been provided or that they're privy to that perhaps hasn't come out in the public yet.
Was there any worry in your part that it was going to be a bit of a circus? Now, just the fact there was this almost Hollywood red carpet hype beforehand, people queuing up like it was going to be the Barbie premiere, where I'm going to get there the night before, I'm going to queue. People were talking about live streaming the event and selfies inside, and it was like, is it Alien Con or is this a congressional hearing? And that's the way I was a little bit worried. And the only moment I did slightly shudder a little bit was when Tim Burchett had his opening statement and there was a big round of applause. And I was like, is this going to be like a hooter and hollering session throughout?
Right.
And it didn't. And I'm glad it didn't turn into that. But did you have any of those fears?
Sure. I mean, obviously, I think that I don't remember all the specifics, but there was certainly some idea that this was going to be a circus atmosphere leading up to it. I was actually waiting to do a live hit for a television show for News Nation, who had people out there and were showing the lines. So that's when I saw these lines outside the hearing. I went,
Yeah.
"Oh my goodness!" That was, it's unfortunate because I don't think a lot of those people were able to get in. It's things you could see from all of us that watched on TV. There's very limited space there, and a lot of those chairs are reserved for the media as well, or witnesses and their guests. So there's really not a lot of spectator room. And so I certainly thought, I anticipated there could have become a circus atmosphere there. And obviously you mentioned that, even some of the politicians that were there, Burchett included, Matt Gaetz included, some of them can certainly turn a congressional meeting into a bit of a circus. Not trying to put anybody down, but they can kind of give you some some of those good clips for the newsreels at the end of it. But that didn't happen, and I was really impressed by that. In terms of what the witnesses, their demeanor, what they had to say, I didn't really have any concerns there. I have spoken considerably to two out of the three witnesses, Ryan Graves and David Grusch. I've spoken very little to Commander Fravor, but I knew these guys, and so I knew that they're really polished, and they came across that way during the entire hearing. And so it was good that I would say any of this circus kind of atmosphere leading up to it certainly didn't appear to have come from the politicians or any of the witnesses involved.
So it's obviously hit pretty hard around, certainly in the UK. I'll speak for the UK because I've been fortunate to do a lot of media since the event. A lot of channels and news organisations, even in the background, who haven't published pieces yet, have spoken to me about potentially doing something or what they want to do. And I've tried to give my advice as best I can and the people who they should really speak to, real serious folks. And I wonder, much of the conversation from their end has really centered around David Grusch and
Mm-hmm.
his statements. It's almost been a bit like the anti-third wheel approach, where you're on a date with your friend and his girlfriend and you feel kind of left out. And it's almost like Commander Fravor and Ryan Graves they've done their piece, but almost like they weren't required. And those big statements from David Grusch are what's gotten all the attention. But can you understand why?
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, what Grush is claiming, those are those are the eye popping claims, and it really kind of leaps past the testimony of Ryan Graves and Commander David Fravor, simply because they give very compelling, they're very credible individuals. They speak well on it, and they're I consider them highly credible witnesses to the events that they encountered, and both in 2004 and 2014 and 15. But theirs are encounters with something anomalous that they say is not our technology and exceeds any kind of technology capability that we have on Earth, not just America, anybody. Whereas, so there's still this unknown. Whereas David Grusch is saying that there is some known to this technology, and that there's possession of the materials and these types of things that have been recovered. They kind of leaped back, and so to a large degree, I think it's understandable because Commander Fravor and Ryan Graves' testimony still leaves this mystery kind of lingering out there. So we've still got to figure out what are these things. Whereas David Grusch is offering kind of this promise that there's a shortcut to figuring it all out, because maybe we have already figured it out. And so I certainly can see why his testimony and all of his claims generate the most attention. Should they? I don't know. It's one of these things. It's difficult. They're very compelling. The fact that he made a lot of his statements that he had already made to us, but did that under oath, certainly up the ante that he's already presented a lot of this, which is in this legal arena and this arena of officialdom that we have not seen before. His claims are not unique. We've had other people that have made these claims. What makes David Grusch's testimony and what he's saying unique is the fact that he is making them through these official channels.
Yep.
In ways that hold consequences legally if he's just lying. For everybody else, there's really, So that, I think, is why David Grusch is getting so much attention, and frankly, understandably, probably should.
Well, in your opinion, is he lying?
No. I mean, this goes back to when we covered his story initially with Ralph and Leslie. My role in all of that was really just fact finding. Ralph and Leslie did all the work. They did the yeoman's work. But before we go to publication, mine was the fact finding and verification and fact check. So it involved me both verifying the information that David Grusch and some of the other individuals in the article had said, but also trying to do that independent of what Ralph and Leslie had done. So it forced me into kind of digging in and talking to some other people about it specifically. And, from that, so again, even though we had no doubts that what David Grusch was saying, that he believes it to be true, before we went to publication with it, the fact that he's saying it under oath only further affirms that, because there's no consequences if he's lying to us. He can deceive us, and the consequences are on us, not him. But the fact that he's done it under oath, there's legal consequences to it. And so going back to even the onset, I've always said, I believe that David Grusch is telling the truth as he sees it. Now, that's I kind of caveat that because, it's such an extraordinary claim. To me, just accepting that I believe that he is sharing what he believes to be truth mean that therefore what he's saying is true, and I accept it. I'm not there yet, only because of what the significance of what we're talking about. Yeah. But it certainly makes it much, much more compelling.
Was it too much? Do you think it was too much looking back now in hindsight?
What, did he share too much? Is that what you're getting at?
I mean, really, we've gone from like baby steps with all of these, and like you say, we've been so used. And I went into this setting the bar low. Like I'm now at like my expectations of Marvel movies low. If I break a smile, I crack a smile, I'm happy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we went from massive redactions and reports, tiptoeing around language, the odd use of ET here and there, to we've got the bodies, the craft, the biologics, and I can tell you where they are. Like, I mean, that went from A to Z quickly.
Yes, no, it did, and it's a hard question to answer. Did he share too much?
Is that one time we'll answer? Do you think that in the coming months and maybe even years that we say we weren't ready or people weren't ready?
I don't know. That's a tough. Yeah, that's one of those ones that you're like, in hindsight, we'll perhaps be able to answer. I mean, it's kind of like answering the entire UAP question as a whole, or what disclosure is. Of course, we want that. We want it now. that's until you know what it actually is.
Yeah.
It may get disclosed. You're like, oh my God, this is so much worse. Like that.
Tim, can I tell you the moment for me that I felt was really jarring? Okay, and it wasn't anything David Grusch said. It was one of the questions, and I can't remember I think it was one of the ladies' names. She asked if it might have been Representative Luna actually, and it sounded like she grabbed a question off a UFO Twitter or UFO X, whatever we're calling it these days. Thanks, Elon, for that. And I hated that idea of taking questions from social media in that setting. It's not a podcast. And she asked if there was any evidence of foreign adversarial governments having technology sharing agreements with non-human intelligences. And I was just like, no, don't, because that's a channel changer for me, for other people who are maybe dipping into this to think, is there something worth watching here? They're talking about UFOs and aliens. And that for me was a jump the shark.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think it maybe would have been more of a jump the shark, depending on what David Grusch answered, which in that case, he said, I don't know anything about that. I hadn't heard anything about that. And I was glad. Yeah. No, I agree. There's certainly, aspects of what David Grusch has said, not necessarily that we're at the hearing, but in other interviews, not even what we published, that even, he did a lot of his TV interviews after our print article came out. And so some of the claims that were made in some of the TV interviews, I remember kind of being like, well, that's a little wild. It seemed to be torn from UFO lore. And you're like, oh, man, this is, the Mussolini crashed UFO thing and stuff. And you're like, oh, what are we talking about here? And so it's hard to kind of measure that, because I'm like you, I'm thinking, it does inject this. If you take an objective view of it and go, okay, how much of this is belief? How much of this is opinion? How much of this is known fact? I do think that it's important, and it seemed during the hearing that David Grusch and obviously Fravor and Graves really stuck to what they felt was fact based on personal or direct information. And in fact, I appreciated the fact that on numerous occasions, David Grusch said, yes, personally, as in personally, I have this information. Personally, I have access to this. Personally, I know this, and stayed away from opinion and belief. Whereas I think that's when we watch TV interviews, podcast interviews, whatever, with a lot of these individuals, they begin to delve off into belief and opinion. And that has a way of becoming canon or becoming truth to people. Like they accept that as truth, where they're just sharing opinion and belief. And certainly, I think, obviously, one of those things that kind of made me go, really? Was when he mentioned individuals being harmed or threatened or harmed to kind of keep the UFO cover up. I remember going, wow. And so I take an objective view to that. So that's a really extreme claim. I was really stunned. I'm thinking this,
especially in that setting, because like you say, that's been said a million times on podcasts, articles, movies. That is one of the things in the UFO topic, that people in the shadows are there to keep this a secret by any means necessary. That's not new, but under oath in that setting, to hear that, basically people's lives have been threatened or harmed, then that's huge.
Sure. And to hear that, I went, wow, like, but the fact that he's saying it under oath, I'm going, okay, I take a very objective view to that, is that he's submitting this as legal testimony evidence in a legal setting. And so therefore you don't have, in my opinion, legally, you don't have the ability to go, well, that just sounds too outlandish to me. We're not going to look into that. You have to. If you don't, then there is no point in swearing anybody under oath. There's no significance to that anymore. So it has to be treated objectively and looked into. And unfortunately, even in those hearing settings, you saw it. Like you said, everybody gets 5 minutes, and I really only remember one representative using their time to grandstand, which was nice, because that happens a lot in politics, where they ask a question and then the remaining 4.5 minutes they go on to telling their, this is why we deserve transparency. And you're like, okay, I don't care what you think. You can talk about that any other time. Let's hear what they think. you heard that, and I went, because I would love to dig deeper and say, well, what are the specifics behind that? Because that's certainly, and so that's where I go. How much of this is our impression or perception of what's being said and truth? And what I mean
Yeah.
by that is when
Yeah.
I heard him say, yes, people have been threatened with harm. You immediately go to X-Files, like Men in Black, like you're thinking movies, the guy, people are showing up at your house. Or is that just a misperception? Is he, referring to the fact that people have been told that, under U.S. law to protect secrets, lethal force can be used. If you were to run into a secure military facility and try to grab the cryptographic keys to their information system, so the things that decipher the codes, if you were to try to grab that, they could shoot you and kill you. And so, is that what he's talking about? Because suddenly that seems less sci-fi fiction TV and more like I could see that happening. I could see somebody telling, somebody else, that attempting to reveal or attempting to access something of highly classified nature, you do realize that, the government's authorized to use force to prevent that from occurring, because that is true. Again, great
But your
example.
point stands that you just like to hear that elaborated on in terms of, is this,
Yeah.
which is a fair call out either way, that we're not entirely sure at this moment. One more moment I'd like to speak on myself and get your opinion was, we hear about a story from Vandenberg Air Force Base 2003, where apparently multiple witnesses see a red rectangle, red square come out the ocean, hover over the base, and this was seen by a lot of people. And then the same incident happened, 24 hours later, where multiple objects were sighted over the base. Had you heard of that story before? And again, what was your thoughts hearing that?
I had not heard of it, and I'll just say up front, I don't know anything about it, and so this is one of those ones where it's exciting because it's something new to look into, and obviously the first thing is wow, because when you're hearing about these multiple different technologies that don't exist in either commercial or even kind of military fashion, and then you're hearing about this kind of large sighting. Oh man, it's one of these ones where I really need to dig into that to learn more about it, to be frank. But it is interesting, and it's also another one of these instances where what's interesting about it is we're just now kind of hearing about it, and there may be other. It's kind of like with the Tic Tac. It wasn't until it came out in the New York Times did we go back and go, "Oh man, somebody tried to disclose this," years earlier on
Yeah.
a website. So there may be more information because it's obviously because there's been grumblings now about a mile wide UFO and this type of stuff. And you're thinking, God, somebody sees something a mile big in the sky, you would think we'd hear about it. You'd think it would be all over Twitter. You'd think it'd be all over Facebook. But we haven't had that. But at the same time, there are times that we just overlook things. We do dismiss it outright.
Yeah, it was, again, I'm thinking back to what you said before about perception, opinion,
Mm-hmm.
a story. Is it verifiable? And was that the place? And I was fascinated to hear that, but was it the place to put that in? And it then makes me think the folks who would cry for, and again, if people listening to or viewing this are maybe in this camp as well, and it's totally fair, we should have heard about remote viewing and alien abductions.
Right.
Again, I'm like, that's for way down the line. Let's keep that stuff out the conversation at the minute, and it's got its time and place, but not yet.
Sure. No, yeah, no, I agree. And obviously every door that opens kind of another hallway of doors. Because you're right. If the government was to come out Monday and say, okay, we have analyzed all of the data that we've compiled thus far through AARO, and we have determined that there are these isolated sightings that indeed do not comport with human technology and appear to represent something other than that. It's like, whoa, now suddenly the hallway door is flung open. And now what David Grusch says, there's a little clearer path to what he's saying. There's a little clearer path to stuff like abductions, all these other things. And so I do agree with you. It is kind of this step process. And to some degree, going back to what you said earlier over, is it too much too soon? I guess that really, what it raises the question is, are we trying to access another door in the hall that we haven't even opened up yet for the majority of people? And the answer to that is probably yes, because for the majority of people, aren't on board with either there being anything to the UFO or UAP topic, or B, that they're just all represent misidentifications, that type of thing. It's a lot of information to process. I'll say that. I mean, after the hearing, that was one of the things I said. I would say to a certain degree, I'm still kind of going through that, where I said, man, I got to take some time to process everything here and
That's why
sort
I
it
thought I would
out.
speak. That's why I wanted to speak to some folks like you to go through these and kind of talk it out loud. And yeah, I think right now it was very much on the tipping point of too much and just enough. And right now it seems to balance on just enough. It's a very fine line. And I think time will tell very quickly if it was just that too much. And I've got a question on that maybe towards the end, Tim. But I want to come back to, you mentioned Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, director of AARO. He has since gone on the defensive, I think it's fair to say, a little bit unhappy at the claims made by David Grusch. And it reminded me a little bit of, when a couple have a breakup and, someone's trying to stay quiet, but then the next day you do that Facebook post of, look, just to clear a few things up. This is what actually happened from my point of view. And I felt almost in a way, is Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick angling for his notice?
Andy, that was bananas.
It was wild.
It was extremely wild. And I, obviously, when I covered it in the article we did for the debrief, we covered everything objectively, like I believe news is supposed to. So I don't interject my opinion, but I did when I posted it on Twitter, or X now, where I was like, this is nuts. And I mean it when I say that I legitimately cannot think of another instance where a senior government official, civil servant, government employee has so publicly, admonished Congress, congressional witnesses, and one of which has an active whistleblower for reprisals. I'm like, this is nuts, because it's not just policy. There's federal law, there's legislation, the Hatch Act, where civil servants are, have to remain apolitical, and they can't. They can't do that. They can't interject themselves in the political process, and certainly can't criticize the politicians. I'm like, this is nuts. Like, I can't believe. And it was really shocking, because I had to rewatch the hearing again, because I was like, why is he so angry? Because I didn't walk away from that hearing going, man, AARO is garbage. Kirkpatrick's a bum. And in fact, I know that he has faced a lot of criticism, at least on social media and everything, leading up to this. But after the hearing, I don't recall seeing that even. I don't probably people being like, oh, Kirkpatrick's a bum. So I'm like, why is he so defensive? Like, why is he so upset? And I was able to pick out a few things through it, but it really was stunning, because I didn't feel like the hearing was, it certainly wasn't lambasting him or AARO, and there was certainly a more palatable way where he could have been like, look, we have not been privy to any of this information, but obviously what's being said deserves scrutiny. But he felt that they were disparaging AARO. I didn't take it that way, but it was it was stunning. And there was even to be honest and give my opinion, there were even portions of his statement that I felt you adequately described by this bad breakup X that goes on there and has this emotional venting. There was certainly elements of rage posting, to the point, I'm going to assume, because the context when it was used, that because he didn't mention David Grusch by name, but he said this individual, which would have been Grusch, has refused to speak with AARO, and this was following the comment of threats of reprisals and everything. And I'm going, AARO is not a law enforcement organization. Like, what Grusch is alleging is both a internal issue with retaliation or reprisal that would be an inspector general issue, or if there are threats of violence, that's a Department of Justice. Sean Kirkpatrick isn't arresting anybody. He isn't going to go file a court order. He's not going to file a criminal complaint on anybody. Like, he's not. You wouldn't call AARO if someone broke into your house. So I'm like, it was a weird, because it, without naming him, it certainly seemed to try to attack David Grusch's credibility. But when you understand the processes and mechanisms that are in place here, you're being kind of petty here, and you're being unreasonable and ridiculous. Like you're again, it's one, the fire department getting mad because you called the police when your car got broken into. It's
Tim, I would say, to be fair, at this point, from what I've seen, I wouldn't call AARO to report a UFO sighting, given some of the things I've seen and heard, not to be too flippant. But you said on your social media that the sentiments in Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick's letter didn't speak for every member of AARO. It was I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's correct. Is that right?
yes, yeah.
And can you elaborate on that?
It's kind of self-explanatory. Without getting too much into it, yeah, I will say that there was some surprise by some people because a large part of the context, or really the tone in Kirkpatrick's statement, was that this was defending the men and women of AARO and felt like they had been bashed. And there's people that didn't feel that way and were relatively surprised because I'm trying to be nice here, and I don't know any other way to do it, but there's certainly a sentiment of there's not a lot of people like Dr. Kirkpatrick. Let me put it that way, who have worked for him, worked with him, both in the past or maybe in recently. He evidently, I don't know him personally. I've spoken only a couple of words to him, but he doesn't appear to be very likable, and so people kind of people that saw it that maybe were internally were going, standing up for us or standing up for yourself. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't give
Right.
a shit
Okay.
about us. Like you're an asshole to us. And so that was kind of the context of that. Is that even going back to people who when he was the director J2 intelligence at Spacecom, or when he was at MASIC, people that have worked with him are like, he just tends to be kind of abrasive. And so that was what there was some sentiment of almost amusement that they felt like he was using them and their hard work to. He had to take this valiant stand when they felt like maybe at certain times their own hard work is not appreciated by him, as is.
He seems the kind of guy that plays his kids at Mario Kart and never lets them win.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know him personally. No, I won't keep you too much longer, Tim, but one thing I
No.
want you to clear up with your knowledge of the US legal system and political system, and something to put into layman's terms for me, is a letter to Speaker McCarthy has gone round from Representatives Burchett, Luna, Gates and Moskowitz, asking for a select committee to be set up with subpoena power. And I'll stop there because then it gets too technical, even for me. Can you explain in plain English what exactly those four are looking to set up and what it's going to achieve?
Sure. So what they're looking to do is set up a select committee. So it would be a like we had the subcommittee whose job you saw that was theirs is oversight over borders control, national security, or you have like the armed services subcommittee. They're asking for what is a temporary committee to be established. So you would put a certain number, just like you see in any of these other committees. So you would have a chair, a vice chair, and a split number of Republicans and Democrats that would be placed on the committee, and their sole job would be UAP and getting to the bottom of the UAP issue, and then the subpoena power would allow them to subpoena witnesses. So, they can request people to come testify or they can subpoena them. And then obviously if you refuse a subpoena, you could be held accountable for that. And so just like you would if you got subpoenaed to court and you refuse to come to court. And so that's what they're asking for. I think people have, anybody who's followed the U.S. politics at all in the last couple of years has probably seen this more relative to you had these when it was related to the Russian election interference that went on. Benghazi, they did that. That was back towards the Obama administration. But that's really, going into Watergate, you name it, any of the really big political finalities where you've gotten some resolution. They've come out of these where you established a select committee of politicians, and like this is going to be your this is what you're going to do. You're going to get down to the bottom of it, and so it'll be very, very interesting to see if it comes through. I'm all for it. And then I think anybody should be, just based on what we've heard thus far. And I think that's the important thing, is that um, for me, it's fine to be skeptical. It's fine to be critical to a certain degree. And I wouldn't ask anybody to just outright believe what David Grusch is saying is true. Um, but because of how he's presented it, hey, let's get to the bottom of it. Let's figure out why. And I think that's the most resolution I'd like to see from a lot of this. And that's an excellent way to do it. Really, that's the mechanism to do it. So it's the next kind of logical step if you want to take this seriously. And I think I can definitely see it happening. I can definitely see McCarthy approving it. Just simply because I think McCarthy may be one of the only influential politicians that I have not specifically heard address UAP. But when you have people like Chuck Schumer, really heavy hitters, especially the legislation that Chuck Schumer put forth just recently, is really robust. And so, yeah, no, but does that kind of sum it up? Does that give you an idea?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I wonder on that then, what is next? And in my head, let me play out. We've got the situation that could this all potentially go away, which is always, something big happens, things escalate with Russia. Russia, Ukraine maybe goes away in a nice way and everyone forgets about the UFO stuff. Hunter Biden story, which I'm not totally up to date on, something with cocaine in the White House, his laptop, etc., right? So there's all that going on in the background and I don't pay too much attention to it. It doesn't interest me. But then on the other side of it, I'm going, is there a real possibility in 6 months' time, given aerospace contractors have been told they've got a grace period to hand over anything they might have, they won't face criminal prosecution, and we could be landed with, or the US Congress could be landed with bits of craft, full intact craft and alien bodies. Is it going to be something in between or just something else altogether?
Yeah, I've said this a lot lately, which is, wonders never cease to amaze me because it's hard to predict what you're going to see next. I will say, in my opinion, in what is normal in both in the political process and the government and just life in general, what's the next logical step is the fact that you have individuals like David Grusch, but it's important to stress here, he's just the most public face there. There are other people, and I know that for a fact. There are other individuals who have likewise expressed affirmative statements to what Grusch has said in other official settings, in other legal settings, that type of thing. I don't see how you can make that go away without doing something. So the forming a committee, a commission to get down to the bottom of it. I don't see how I don't see how you can just all of a sudden be like, oh, no, oh well, let's go on to something else. There's got to be some kind of resolution. What that
Do you think like a new Project Blue Book type scenario where they bring that up to modern day?
I don't think, I think that's what AARO kind of is, and where the claims that are being made by David Grusch and others. This is a beast of a different animal, because where Blue Book was supposed to get to the bottom of the UFO topic, AARO likewise is supposed to get to the bottom of the UAP topic. What's being alleged here is that there is considerably more information, including material science and you name it, behind it. And so I think that that's asking for a beast of a different animal that really does a very really scrutinized internal audit of these claims that are being made by David Grusch and others, verifying what they're saying, and then what they do from that point forward. But the legislation that's just been recently proposed, the one that was co-sponsored by Marco Rubio, I believe, but put forth by Chuck Schumer, that is incredibly robust. And frankly, if that passes as is, what we've seen, that will give a lot of the legal authority to do that, because they, went into specifically naming out materials and things that even if it in, legislating that they would exercise eminent domain on it, meaning that even if a private contractor, let's say they had a crashed UFO, and they're like, it's ours, it's private property, it's ours. Eminent domain means no, it isn't. The government can come in and take it for public good. And I think that's what's really interesting there. I think somebody said it, and I said, it would be the most American thing ever is that the disclosure of all of this comes out through some type of legal court case, because there is all these other legal battles.
Yeah.
You could see, Lockheed say, no, we're not going to share it. That would be amazing, to have these kind of legal battles. We're in uncharted water. I'll say it that way, because I have long said I don't know an easy path for the government, any government, to come out and go, you got us. All right, we got all these crafts and bodies. Yeah, sorry, we were just kidding for 70 years. Because as much as people like to say, they would all of a sudden be like, thank you for coming clean. We forgive you, hugs. That's not real life, because the vast majority of people, even the ones that are the regular voting public, who maybe read the David Grusch story when it's on the New York Times or whatever, and then go about their daily life, when that comes out, suddenly they're going, holy we can't trust our government. We can't trust the president. Like, it kind of collapses this whole system. So, I've always said, how do you, if all of that is true, how do you release it without kind of creating anarchy? I think for a lot of people who want to see that information come out, the answer is always like, it won't, we're ready, it's cool. And it's like, well, it is a nice sentiment, but I'm not sure that that's real life. I say all that, not saying that I believe it should be hidden. It should have been hidden in the first place, if it is. And so, but how do you disclose it now without creating anarchy? I don't know.
Well, hopefully we're not just in uncharted waters, but uncharted water, air, and space.
There you go. Yeah, we're in all domains. We're in uncharted all domains right now, Andy.
And the debrief will be there to cover it along the way. Yourself, Micah Hanks, and the rest of the crew, who all do wonderful work. So it's very much appreciated by people like myself.
Thank you. Yes, we will keep chipping away at it. It's if nothing else, I would say I have said for years that the crashed UFO thing was not something I really pursued. You really kind of alluded to it by saying, man, are we putting the cart before the horse? It seemed like jumping too far. But given what's come out and everything, and especially when you have these official channels in place, it is the obligation of both authorities and I think the media to legitimately pursue it. So now we're kind of pursuing those angles. So who knows what'll come out.
Well, all the links will be in the description. Tim, thank you for joining us again. It's been wonderful speaking with you. Check out thedebrief.org for all the latest UAP news, and it's also got tech, science, there's war correspondence on there, and a whole lot of other things as well. So please do check it out, and we'll speak to you again very soon.